I think that will continue to drive the growth of the overall ecosystem and innovation of it before we'll really see institutional demand, which is necessary to really bring this from sub 1 trillion asset class to a 10 trillion asset class.
Hi, everyone, wherever you are. Hope you're having a wonderful week so far. We're here with the latest episode of the Inside Crypto Show, interviews and discussions with regular people just like yourselves. Today, we are joined by Sebastian Widmann, who is the head of strategy at Komainu, where he leads the development and execution of Komainu's vision to become the key partner for institutions entering the digital asset industry. Komainu is a regulated digital asset custody provider built by institutions for institutions. Before we dive into the crux of today's show, we have to talk about Sebastian's background. Sebastian, thank you so much for making time. Tell me about yourself.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Sebastian Widmann. As Kriyan mentioned, I'm the head of strategy at Komainu, the first regulated digital asset custody solution built by institutions for institutions. I started my journey in the digital asset space around 2013, 2014 when I was in high school. I did a lot of research into the space. I helped launch the UCL Center of Blockchain Technologies. And then I joined Nomura, the Japanese investment bank, initially focusing on everything fintech related, but then becoming the first hire in the digital assets team. Nomura was one of the first global institutions to really take it seriously, to look at the potential of distributed ledger technology, from anything from tokenization and efficiency opportunities to also understanding the potential of cryptocurrencies and digital assets as a new asset class. So my role there was really twofold. On one side, it was a lot of research and education internally and externally. But then the big question was, how can we get to gain access to the digital asset ecosystem by having or relying on end-to-end regulated infrastructure? We looked across the spectrum. We invested in exchanges. We looked at data providers, tokenization companies. We couldn't find a custodian to invest in or partner with. And so we took a step back and decided to partner with two large names in the ecosystem. On one side, Ledger, the French technology provider, and on the other side, CoinShares, one of the leading digital asset fund managers, to really work together and set up Komainu, which is the first regulated digital asset custody business. We announced it in 2018, and since then have really been working on growing the business and bringing more institutions into this very exciting asset class.
Nice. That's amazing and really exciting. Sebastian, you mentioned 2013, right? Doing research when in high school. What was the thing that prompted you to say, I've got to research this. I've got to find out what it's all about. Like, what motivated you?
Yeah. So I stumbled across it. I had a good friend who was much more technical than I am. He was doing a lot of research around how to re-decentralize the web. He also ended up working for Tim Berners-Lee in MIT, and then later becoming one of the co-founders of Filecoin. So that was really the access point that by chance I had the right person and the right discussions. And I think I was also in the right mind frame. So initially, as everyone, I started reading in the high level, but then I got quite interested in the overall potential of the technology. So when I then moved to university, I met thought leader in the space, who was also one of the professors of the graduate school. And together we launched the UCL Center of Blockchain Technologies, which was the first university research department really focusing not on just blockchain, but distributed ledger technology. And there we explored use cases that today we would call as NFTs, security tokens, etc. in the early days. And so it was very interesting really to gain exposure to the ecosystem between 2015 and 2017, when there was still a very small group working on it quite actively, especially from a research perspective. And so it was very interesting to see where some of these people that I've known for a couple of years have ended up, anything from the World Bank to leading positions in major institutions to having founded their own crypto projects, which are doing very well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Sebastian, you've been in the space for such a long time. I think most people we talked to on this podcast are maybe 5-6 years. We had a few people in your sort of experience range. And I have to ask this, 10 years is a long time. It's going to be 2024 in a few months, right? How have things changed from like your perspective in the last 10 years or so?
Yeah, I think it definitely became more aware. So also to give you a perspective, when I was in Nomura, obviously back 2017, I was the crypto guy on the trading floor. As you can imagine, there was still a lot of noise. I think the digital asset ecosystem, and when you see all these hype cycles and then bear market and bull markets, etc., there's always a narrative. I've been super interested to see how the narrative has changed over these past 10 years. At the time it was, or when we started, or a lot of people started with Bitcoin or digital asset as a whole, a lot of the use cases were around illicit finance. So it was a permissionless, anonymous currency. And to date, we know that Bitcoin can be traced. There's tools like Chainalysis where you can really start doing heavy analytics also used by government to really understand the use cases of Bitcoin, the flows on the globe, etc. I think the narratives have been changed. So around 2017, when we started, it was around illicit financing, and that's why regulation wasn't in place then. I think also regulation is a good thing to start changing the narrative. Around 2020, 2021, the narrative moved to it being not friendly for the environment because of the mining. I think that narrative has also been debunked. And so there's new narratives that really shape up, create more interest, I think, across industries and across age groups or spectrums, and so really drive adoption. So I think I see Bitcoin to some extent as the first social financial network, which really follows mid-class law. And I think with every hype cycle where you see new members entering the market, potentially initially losing out money, but not selling, every time we start having this new hype phase, they get reinterested and bring more people in. And it will be a network that will continuously grow, I think, over the next decade to come as well.
I don't think anybody who listens to this podcast would disagree with you. Let's get talking about Komainu. Before we go, I have to remind everyone, right? Anything I say is not financial or legal advice. It's just our own opinion, not to be connected with our respective organizations. Sebastian, our first question has to be, right? It's almost the end of September. And I was wondering if you could talk about from your perspective, from Komainu's perspective, what have been the asset flows like? September is typically like a poor month across the board for crypto, not to mention traditional equities. Are you seeing the same thing? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is flows. So obviously as a custodian, we have assets under custody. We charge a percentage on the number of assets we have under custody in dollar terms. I think twofolds. One of our investors is CoinShares and also one of our joint venture partners. They publish weekly reports on the digital asset products that you can find on exchanges, including exchange-traded products. I think to date and year to date, there's been a quite small net inflow of around 50 million. Over the past, I think, 10 weeks, there's been around $500 million of net outflows, mainly driven, I think, around 80% is driven by US investors. That is to say that new assets or net new assets, as we call them in Komainu, coming into the ecosystem or the industry as a whole has been stable or quite negative, to be honest. But I think as a custodian, we think more as to what are the net new assets for us. And that has been quite positive, I think, since the start of the year, and especially accelerated since the FTX blow up last year, because institutions and investors in this space really started to understand the need for an independent regulated custodian. And so it was less so that the cake grew, it's more that Komainu received more of the cake. Twofolds. On one side, there is clients that in the past never used a custodian. They relied on exchange custody or self-custody. It now became very apparent that they're happy to pay for a custodian where they know their assets are there, bankruptcy remote, etc. And twofold also players that had custodians that then decided to diversify on really starting to look at different types of custody that are offered in the space, and that's resonate with Komainu, the way we're doing things, the way we're regulated across the globe, our policies and procedures. And so we've seen a net asset growth throughout the year, definitely accelerated since last year's event.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. I know on previous guests we've had on the podcast, they've talked about things that have happened with other big projects and other protocols and other exchanges and commingling of assets, and that has been a major issue.
Yeah.
Looking at Komainu, are you seeing demand from exchanges all across the board or specific crypto protocols? The crypto ethos has always been decentralized, but it seems like centralization to a certain extent using a crypto custody provider does bring this sort of level of security, not just like with regulations, but just helps customers and customers of your customers feel, okay, Komainu is safe. I trust them. This is segregated. It's available online. I can check it out, like that sort of stuff. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, it's twofold. I think on one side, there's regulation that really enforces certain types of player, mainly the institutional or also managers that have third-party money or client money, to rely on institutional or regulated custodian in given jurisdictions, especially the more institutional breed that are accustomed to the segmentation and segregation of duties in the traditional financial services industry, whereby you use custodians like State Street, like JP Morgan, or these global custodians really to hold traditional financial assets. I think traditional institutions, as they gain exposure to the space, they want to replicate the value chain as closely as possible. And so they're also pushing for segregation of duties across the value chain. So we're seeing that's a drive. We also see exchanges that want to prove to the market that they're not the next FTX. They want to focus more on their order books, really connecting liquidity or creating liquidity, but they don't want to sit on the assets. In traditional finance, if you sit on the asset and you match orders, you're a prime broker. In digital asset ecosystem, exchanges are still, or broker still a question mark as to what is the clear segmentation. And we think having independent third-party custody really helps the market mature and creates more security for investors as well as for these venues. And so we see the trend to continue to pick up.
Perfect. We've talked about this indirectly, but for those who might not be familiar with you or the idea of custody, tell us about Komainu and what's your unique proposition when it comes to custody services.
Yeah, absolutely. So custody is really twofold. When we started Komainu in 2018, there was a lot of discussion around hacks. Luckily, I think across the industry, standards have been adopted, anything from SOC procedures to ISOs and right technological standards. So anything from cold storage to MPC technology to HSMs. So I think we see less and less hacks, at least on this centralized platforms. We see a lot of hacks in the DeFi world, but that is more on the smart contracting side. I think security is secure enough. So really the core focus of a custodian is to provide secure custody of assets. But I think since then it's evolved to really mean also compliant and regulated custody. So the way Komainu does it is we have every client's assets segregated from each other, as well as from Komainu's proprietary assets. So we would never commingle your assets, client, with one of our clients, really allowing you also on-chain proof that if these are your wallets and they're custodied by Komainu, you really see them on-chain as well as through the reports we share with you. The focus then has been to really look at how can we create utility out of custody. There's no real point in custody if you have to have the assets in custody and then move them for every trade you want to make. So we've announced earlier this year Komainu Connect, where we work with a number of leading exchanges that allow our clients to trade on venue whilst having the assets in secure custody with Komainu. And that really creates the utility whereby over time you don't really need to move the assets in and out. You just need to do that for the settlement process. And then lastly, given that digital assets have their intrinsic characteristics and use cases, we also allow clients to earn yield out of custody through staking services. So we offer end-to-end regulated staking in a number of jurisdictions, whereby a client really can simply interact with us and we take care of the rest of the process. So it's really custody, so the safekeeping of assets, as in the traditional sense, and then asset servicing, whether that's through Komainu Connect, allowing clients to trade out of custody, or by earning yields through our staking offering.
That's awesome. Like being able to stake while having that feeling of security is amazing. From like a customer side, right? Do you take a percentage of the staking yield, or does it all go back to the clients? How does that work?
Most goes back to the client, so we get paid for the operational procedures. So we're not an investment manager, so we would never advise a client on what to do. One of our core ethos is that we always act on client instructions. Anything from whether the client wants to move a digital asset from A to B, or whether he wants to stay with this validator versus that other. So we see ourselves as an enabler in this ecosystem. And then we take different fee models depending on the client and use cases based on the operations they do.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Sebastian, you recently acquired your virtual asset provider license in Dubai, and anyone has looked at the news, it sees Dubai is well ahead in terms of regulation and what's going on there as far as crypto goes. And why is this so important for the future of Komainu?
So we see Dubai, and I think the UAE as a whole, is a very proactive regulatory regime. The government really understands the potential of digital assets and this overall asset class. I think they've created the first regulator that really focuses, understands the complexities and specific characteristics of digital assets. So we've been very happy and fortunate to be part of that journey to really help set up the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority and become the first digital asset custodian to receive a full regulatory regime. We see a lot of interest from new companies that want to set up their entity in a regulatory and proactive jurisdiction, but also existing companies that potentially operate in less friendly environments or where rules change or are not as clear to really relocate to this ecosystem. So we see the UAE as a whole as a new vibrant ecosystem. I think it's still early days, but we see trend across the UAE as a whole, as well as the GCC as a full region, and we're very excited to be part.
That's all amazing. You mentioned the UAE, and I know lots of people say, all right, Dubai is going to be a hub in 5 years. I live south of Japan in Taiwan, right? And I think it's going to be Asia or Korea or Japan or a combination. Taiwan's a little bit too small to be a hub. And there's Hong Kong as well. Hong Kong's been like accelerated to the forefront with regulation, whereas the mainland China was like, no, we're not going to do this. And now they are. What's your take on that, given you are mixed with Ledger and with now you're in Dubai? Are you going to be Komainu Asia at some point in the future?
Yes, we already have an office in Singapore.
Nice.
I think that we hope there won't be just one hub, and I think it would go against the ethos of the ecosystem. I hope to see a future where you see major global cities really establishing themselves as hub. Overall, governments and regulators trying to create a standard across the globe for digital assets and really harmonized regulation that can potentially be passportable across different jurisdictions. We see it's coming up with MiCA in the European Union, which I see as a big advantage. The UK is making strides. I think the US, there's a lot of discussion, but little action to date. But I think that also will change in the future. And then I think Asia has also gone through cycles. So Hong Kong was open back in 2017. They closed down. Now I think they're super proactive again. Similar with Singapore. Japan has been one of the first jurisdictions to really see adoption of digital assets back in 2015 with Mt. Gox in 2017. Then shut down slowly and now is reopening. To really see this as an evolution. I think it's not that one jurisdiction or one ecosystem will thrive at the expense of others. I think that some will evolve faster than others. Then everyone will learn from each other and we'll see hopefully harmonized global regulatory adoption as well as a number of hubs really spreading out around the globe.
Nice. No, I agree with you. And that's a very astute summary. Sebastian, you're the strategy person, right, at Komainu. And how do you plan for strategy, though, if you've got your Dubai license, right? But at the same time, regulations are evolving, as you mentioned, fast in the EU with MiCA and with Japan and with Singapore and with the States as well. Like, how do you plan for anything, knowing everything's shifting continuously, at least until maybe next year?
It's really twofold. On one side is regulatory engagement. We have a great regulatory team across the globe. We engage with regulators, always also on a fact-finding basis, also to act as educators and provide our insights to different regulators for them to understand how we see the world or what we do different based on different jurisdictions. And then secondly, and more importantly even, is driven by client demand. So where do we see our clients have regulatory requirements? Where do we see them be interested in setting up or expanding their digital asset strategy to? As we are a more traditional, I think, institutional grade digital asset custodian. So a lot of our clients have global mandates. It's not that they can operate just in one jurisdiction. And so over time, we want to be the most regulated digital asset custodian across the globe, from east to west, to really be able to meet the growing demands of clients across the globe, but then also to be able to service our clients not exclusively in one or the other jurisdiction, but be able to give them and provide them with a global offering for their custody needs.
That makes a lot of sense. Sort of becoming a bit more granular, right? Zooming in. Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? I remember seeing something on LinkedIn about CoinGecko posting like the top like ETFs, ETPs, and everything was either Bitcoin or Ethereum, right? Do you ever think we'll move beyond that even from a regular crypto user to like an institutional perspective, or is that going to be the dominant narrative for crypto at least in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin at least definitely will be the dominant driving force for the foreseeable future. It's been longer in existing and has a longer track record, and it's the biggest asset, right? So in the grand scheme of things, all of the digital asset ecosystem or all cryptocurrencies together are still smaller than the largest US single company stocks. So I think it's too small to really go and dive deep, especially from an institutional investor perspective, into a top 50 plus cryptocurrency. I think the position, especially from institutional adoption, will be driven by Bitcoin and maybe ETH for the top 5 at a max. As the overall ecosystem grows and institutional investors as well as regulators understanding more of the complexities, differences between cryptocurrencies, use cases, differences between a utility token, a payment token, and so on, I think we'll see more education. And then also some cryptocurrencies growing at a faster rate than others, really driven by institutional demand. I think retail will continue to be the innovator in the ecosystem. They'll continue to dip their toes in anything from DAO tokens to NFT-based tokens, DeFi exchanges, etc. I think that will continue to drive the growth of the overall ecosystem and innovation of it before we'll really see institutional demand, which is necessary to really bring this from sub 1 trillion asset class to a 10 trillion asset class.
That's perfect. I totally agree with you. I've heard about tokenization, and we've talked about this on the podcast a few times. What's your take on that? Is that something that's Komainu is planning for at some point in the future to become more than just a digital asset custodian, as well as be like a tokenization provider or custodian?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the reasons we started Komainu was really to focus on tokenization. So the idea is, and at the time, especially Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency ecosystem as a whole was, I think, a $200 billion asset class. So it's not big enough to really gain the interest of a large institution like Nomura. So the focus has really been how can we enable Nomura, and that's why Komainu from day one has always been a digital asset custodian rather than a crypto custodian. The focus has always been how can we make sure that a player, an institution like Nomura, but also more broader global financial service institution can access digital assets by relying on secure and regulated custody. And the bigger opportunity has always been tokenization. So how can you bring traditional financial assets on chain? How can you look at different ways of fiat with what we're seeing now, a lot of innovation in the stablecoin realm, and then also new assets that to date or in the past haven't been really brought to the financial landscape, to tokenize them and then potentially create digital assets out of it, investment products and so forth. So we see a lot of innovation. Back in 2017, I think there's been more around R&D in the space. I think now the market reached a certain level of understanding and maturity that we're seeing live projects that also have the opportunity to generate revenues. So really accelerating then the adoption of these. I think it's extremely difficult. Whilst cryptocurrencies has predominantly been a retail phenomenon, tokenization and tokenized assets will have to be an institutional phenomenon. There's a lot of legacy regulation. There's a lot of legacy infrastructure that often also works. And so there's really a balance of how big is the cost benefit or use case versus how difficult is the challenge to really restructure the existing financial market. So I think there's a lot of interest project in the market. We as a custodian always want to enable our clients. So we're very close to research and innovation in the space and to really understand how we fit in this broader value chain and how we then work closely with our institutional clients, whether that's banks or asset managers, to really enable them on their tokenization journey. I, however, think that it's still early days. I think throughout 2024, 25, we'll see a lot of innovation and live products come to market. But I think that'll take another 5+ years to really see widespread adoption.
Nice. No, I agree with you. Sebastian, I hate to ask this question, but unfortunately, audiences love speculation and the future and that sort of stuff. You've said so many cool things today, and I wish I could disagree with you, but I totally agree with everything you've said. Our audience always loves to know what's the future, right? Everyone knows 21 Co, 21 shares, we custody with Copperance, and I only became aware of all the other options as well as Komainu as well, I think probably at the end of last year. What are you looking forward to in the future in terms of 2024, 2025, in terms of growing and where you want to go and where you want to be? And what's the plans rumbling around your brain?
Yeah, our mission won't change. Our mission is really to become the most regulated institutional grade digital asset custodian. We also see ourselves as an educator. So I think we'll see a very interesting year in 2024 as well as 2025 on the macro geopolitical level, as well as on the more micro level, looking at company strategies. So since I think 2018, we've been educating and working with most major financial service institutions to really educate them, understand their strategies, and see how we can be part of their mission and how we can become their partner to allow them to access the digital asset ecosystem. I think a lot of these strategies are now coming into action. We see a lot of progress and really a lot of activation of these strategies. So I continue to see institutional adoption of this digital asset class to grow and to accelerate. And we'll see more and more regulatory clarity across the scope, which really further acts as driver for faster institutional adoption. And so I think we'll really see a turning point where it's not when digital assets get adopted, it's here and it's alive.
No, I totally agree. And even looking at here, it's never been hated or disliked, but slowly the government's, okay, we know a lot if you have crypto, so we're going to start creating some regulations around it. Sebastian, you've been awesome today. As always with this podcast, I'd like to give guests a chance to say, is there anything, like we've talked about Komainu, we've talked about you, we've talked about strategy. Is there anything else that you're supposed to say that you haven't said yet? Anything you'd like to end off today's podcast on?
No, always happy to engage with audiences, whether they want to interact, learn more about Komainu, or they want to learn how to get into the space. So I'm available on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'll post the link in the show notes. So I'm always happy to engage with like-minded individuals in this.
Perfect. So I will include your LinkedIn. Are you on any other social media? Are you doing any other videos? Does Komainu have a YouTube channel that people can watch Sebastian on?
We have a great marketing team. Watch this space. We'll come up with a lot of new cool stuff. But in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn. I think is the easiest way.
Sweet. Then we'll include the LinkedIn. We'll include Komainu's links as usual, as we do with every guest who's on the podcast. Thank you so much for your time, Sebastian. And hopefully we can catch up with you at some point in the future to see how custody is going in 2024.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kriyan, and thank you, everyone.